The knock came after midnight, soft enough that it might have been the wind. Jonah Mercer lifted his head from the table, heart tightening as the sound echoed again. 3 weak taps against the cabin door, uneven, almost apologetic. Nobody knocked out here. His ranch sat alone on the Wyoming plains, miles from the nearest settlement. Travelers passed by daylight if they passed at all, and men who came at night usually didn't ask permission. Jonah stood slowly, his chair scraping the floor. The fire crackled low on the hearth, throwing tired shadows against the log walls. Outside, the wind howled across the open land, carrying the kind of cold that bit through bone and made even strong men nervous. The knock came again, lighter this time. Jonah reached for the rifle beside the door, his fingers closing around the worn with stock. He didn't rush. Rushing got men killed. He stepped to the side of the door and spoke into the darkness. "State your business." Silence stretched. Then a woman's voice broke through the night, thin and shaking. "Please, sir, I just need one night. Just the barn. I won't trouble you. My boy, he's freezing." Jonah's jaw tightened. A woman, a child, alone at this hour. He pulled the door open just enough to see. She stood there swaying on her feet, her coat too thin for the season, her hair loose and tangled around a pale face marked with exhaustion. In her arms was a small boy, maybe 5 years old, pressed against her chest, his face flushed red, his breast shallow and uneven. Snow clung to her hem. Her boots were torn. One sleeve was ripped clean at the elbow. They hadn't arrived by horse. They had walked. Jonah lowered the rifle slowly. "How long has he been sick?" he asked. The woman swallowed. "Since yesterday morning. I tried to keep him warm, but the wind..." Her voice cracked. "Please, the barn will do." Jonah looked past him into the dark. No lantern, no supplies, no wagon tracks. Whatever had driven them here had teeth, and it was close enough that she didn't dare stop moving. "You'll freeze in the barn," Jonah said. Her shoulders sagged. "I won't ask for more then. Come inside." She stared at him like she hadn't understood. "My boots are filthy." "Inside," he repeated, stepping back. "Now." She hesitated only a second before crossing the threshold. The warmth of the cabin hit her hard, and Jonah caught her arm as her knees buckled. She steadied herself, clutching the child tighter. "Thank you," she whispered, the words falling out like a prayer. Jonah shut the door and slid the heavy latch into place. "What's his name?" he asked, already moving toward the fire. "Samuel," she said softly. "My son." "And yours?" "Eliza." Jonah nodded once. "I'm Jonah Mercer." He added wood to the fire, building the flames higher. Then he crossed the narrow bed along the wall and stripped off the blanket. "Lay him here." "I can't take your bed." "You're not taking it," Jonah said. "You're using it." Eliza lowered Samuel onto the mattress, her hands trembling as she brushed damp hair from his burning forehead. The boy whimpered, his fingers curling weakly in her sleeve. Jonah turned away before the sight could do more damage than it already had. "I'll make something warm," he said, pulling a pot from the shelf. "And you'll tell me who you're running from." Eliza stiffened. "I didn't say." "You didn't have to," Jonah replied quietly. "People don't walk through this land at night unless they're being chased." She looked at him then, really looked, and whatever she saw made her eyes fill with tears she hadn't allowed herself yet. "He says we belong to him," she whispered. "But I'd rather die than let my son grow up afraid." Jonah stared into the fire, something old and dangerous waking in his chest. "You can stay," he said at last. "Both of you." Outside, the wind howled louder, as if angered by the answer. And Jonah Mercer knew, deep in his bones, that letting them in had already changed everything. Morning came slowly, gray light creeping through the frost-edged window, like it was unsure it was welcome. Jonah Mercer woke on the floor by the fire, his back stiff and his joints aching, but he didn't move right away. He listened. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackle of dying embers and the uneven breathing coming from the bed. Too fast. Too shallow. Jonah pushed himself up and crossed the room. Samuel lay twisted in the blankets, his cheeks flushed, his lips dry and cracked. Eliza sat beside him, awake, unmoving, as though she'd been holding vigil all night. "He got worse," she whispered. He was shaking before dawn. Jonah pressed the back of his hand to the boy's forehead. "Burning. How long has he been like this?" he asked. Eliza hesitated. 3 days. I tried herbs, tried cold water, tried praying. Jonah nodded. Sometimes prayer was all people had left. Sometimes it wasn't enough. "We'll bring the fever down," he said, more confident than he felt. "I've seen this before." Her eyes lifted to his, desperate and searching. "You have?" "Long time ago," Jonah replied. He didn't explain. Some memories didn't like daylight. He fetched water from the barrel, his movement steady, deliberate. Cold water first. Cloth soaked and wrung out. He showed Eliza how to place them at Samuel's neck and wrists, how to change them when they warmed. "You're good with him," Eliza said quietly, watching his hands. Jonah shrugged. "Used to be." They worked in silence for a while. The boy stirred, whimpering softly, his small fingers grasping at the blanket like he was drowning. "Mama?" Samuel murmured. "I'm here," Eliza said instantly, her voice gentle and fierce all at once. "I'm not going anywhere." Jonah stepped back, giving them space, but the sight struck him deeper than he expected. He turned toward the window, scanning the land beyond. The plains lay empty and white under the pale sky, deceptively peaceful. No riders, no smoke. That didn't mean they were safe. "You said he thinks you belong to him," Jonah said without turning around. "Who is he?" Eliza's hand stilled. "His name is Calebro, my husband, or he says he is." Jonah's jaw tightened. "He wasn't always cruel," she continued. "At least I didn't think so. But after Samuel was born, something changed. He drank more, watched us like property. If dinner was late, if I spoke out of turn." She stopped, swallowing hard. "When I said I was leaving," she whispered. He laughed. "Said the world would teach me better." Jonah looked at her then, really looked. The bruising shadows beneath her eyes, the way she flinched at sudden sounds, the strength it must have taken to walk away anyway. "You did right," he said. Eliza let out a shaky breath. "It doesn't feel right. It feels like I'm stealing my own life." Jonah shook his head. "No, you're reclaiming it." Samuel stirred again, coughing weakly. Jonah crossed back to the bed. "There's willow bark down by the creek," he said. "I'll make tea. Bitter, but it helps." "You're leaving?" Eliza asked, panic flickering across her face. "Not far, and not long." He met her eyes. "I won't leave you unprotected." She nodded slowly, forcing herself to believe him. Jonah pulled on his coat and stepped outside. The cold hit him hard, but it cleared his head. He moved fast, scanning tracks, watching the ridges, reading the land the way he always had. Boot prints, fresh, his pulse spiked. They circled the cabin, faint but unmistakable, half hidden by snow. Someone had been close, maybe watching, maybe waiting. Jonah crouched, studying the depth. One man, heavy steps, confident. Caleb Rowe was closer than Eliza knew. Jonah straightened, a grim resolve settling over him. He returned to the cabin with the willow bark and brewed the tea while Eliza coaxed Samuel to drink. The boy grimaced but swallowed. "You don't owe us this," Eliza said softly. "We can leave once he's strong enough." Jonah met her gaze, his voice low and firm. "No one gets chased through the cold and told they're a burden. Not here, not under my roof." Outside, the wind shifted direction, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a man who believed he owned everything he touched was following their trail. By afternoon, the fever finally began to loosen its grip. Samuel slept more deeply now, his breathing steadier, the angry heat fading beneath Jonah's careful watch and Eliza's tireless tending. Relief settled over the cabin like a fragile truce, but Jonah didn't let himself believe it meant safety. Trouble rarely announced itself twice. He kept his rifle close, eyes drifting to the window every few minutes, listening not just with his ears, but with something deeper, an instinct sharpened by years of solitude and survival. Eliza noticed. "You're waiting for something," she said quietly. Jonah nodded. "Someone." Her fingers tightened in the blanket. "Caleb?" "Yes." Silence stretched between them, heavy with understanding. "I didn't mean to drag you into this," Eliza said. "You opened your door out of kindness, and now—" Jonah cut her off gently. "This land taught me something a long time ago. Kindness isn't weakness. It's a line, and once you draw it, some men will try to cross it." A sound carried on the wind then, faint, rhythmic. Hooves. Jonah's hand went to his rifle before thought could catch up. He moved to the window, easing the curtain aside just enough to see. One rider. A dark horse cutting across the open land, heading straight for the cabin. Jonah's jaw set. "Get behind the stove," he told Eliza. "Stay low. Don't move unless I say." Eliza didn't argue. She gathered Samuel and slipped into the narrow space, her body curved protectively around her son. Jonah stepped onto the porch as the rider pulled up hard, snow spraying from the horse's hooves. The man swung down with practiced ease, tall and broad-shouldered, his coat too fine for the work he pretended to do. Caleb Rowe smiled. "There you are," he said lightly. "I was beginning to think you'd disappeared." Jonah didn't return the smile. Private land. Caleb's eyes flicked past him toward the door. "I'm looking for my wife and boy. They wandered off. She's confused sometimes." Jonah's voice stayed level. "Haven't seen them." Caleb laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Now that's a shame, because I followed their track straight here." He stepped closer. Jonah didn't move. "Turn around," Jonah said. "Leave." Caleb's smile thinned. "You don't understand how this works. She belongs to me. The boy belongs to me. You don't get to decide otherwise." Jonah leaned slightly, just enough for Caleb to see the Colt resting at his hip. "You're mistaken," Jonah replied. "Out here, a man decides what he stands for, and I stand between you and that door." The air went tight. Caleb studied him, measuring. Then his gaze sharpened. "You're alone," he said, "and you're making a mistake that'll cost you." Could say the same. For a long moment, neither man moved. Wind rattled the porch boards. Somewhere inside, Samuel coughed softly. Caleb's eyes flicked to the sound, and something dark flashed across his face. "So they are here," he said. "Good. Saves me time." Jonah drew his pistol. "So does this." Caleb stopped smiling. He raised his hand slowly. "Easy now. No need for blood." Jonah didn't lower the gun. "You leave. You don't come back." Caleb's jaw worked. You think you won something? You think one night makes you a savior? No, Jonah said. I think you're a bully who met a boundary. Caleb mounted his horse, eyes never leaving Jonah. This isn't over, he said quietly. Men like me don't lose what's theirs. He turned his horse and rode off, snow swallowing his tracks. Jonah stood on the porch long after the sound faded. When he went back inside, Eliza looked at it with eyes full of fear and gratitude. He'll come back, she said. Yes, Jonah agreed. But next time he won't come alone. Eliza swallowed. Then we should leave. Jonah shook his head. Not while Samuel's weak. Not while you're running. He met her gaze, his voice steady. Sometimes the safest place is where someone finally says no. Outside, clouds rolled in low and heavy, promising snow. And Jonah Mercer began planning, not for escape, but for a stand. Snow began falling before night, fully claimed the sky, thick flakes drifting down like ash. The world beyond a cabin blurred into white silence. But Jonah Mercer knew better than to mistake quiet for peace. Eliza watched the storm from the window. Samuel was asleep in her arms at last, his breathing slow and even. The relief on her face was fragile, like glass that might shatter at the next loud sound. He'll use the storm, she said softly. Caleb always did. Said bad weather made people careless. Jonah checked the rifle again, counting cartridges by feel. Storm cuts both ways, makes men sloppy. He moved to the cabin with deliberate purpose, shifting the table, stacking crates near the windows, clearing lines of sight. This wasn't his first fight. He just wished it weren't happening now. Eliza, he said, I need you to listen carefully. She looked up at him, her grip tightening on Samuel. If things go bad, there's a back trail behind the barn. Jonah continued. It leads north to the creek bend, then into timber. You take Samuel and you run. Don't look back. Her face drained of color. I won't leave you. You will if it keeps him alive. Silence stretched, heavy and aching. Finally, she nodded. All right. Jonah handed her a small revolver, its grip worn smooth by time. You know how to use this? My father taught me, she said, before he died. Good. Jonah's voice softened. Only use it if you must. Night fell hard. The wind rose, howling against the cabin walls, rattling the shutters like a warning. Jonah took position near the window, breath slow, senses sharp. Then he heard it. Voices, muffled by the storm, but close. A lantern flared outside, its light swinging wildly through the snow. Then another. Jonah exhaled. 3 men. He stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. That's far enough, he called. The lantern stopped. Snow swirled around them, ghostly shapes in the dark. Caleb's voice cut through the wind, smooth and certain. Jonah, let's not make this ugly. You brought friends, Jonah replied. That makes it uglier already. Caleb laughed. Insurance. Step aside and we'll be done in minutes. Jonah didn't move. Last chance, Caleb warned. I'll burn this place to the ground if I have to. Jonah's voice dropped, hard as iron. You take 1 step closer, and one of you doesn't leave. A gunshot cracked the night. Not Jonah's. A bullet tore through the porch post inches from his head. That was all it took. Jonah fired back. The rifles report thunderous in the storm. 1 man screamed and went down. Chaos erupted. Shouts. More shots. Lanterns dropped, shattering, plunging the yard into flickering darkness. Jonah retreated inside, bolting the door. Wood splintered as bullets struck the walls. "Eliza now," he shouted. She ran. Jonah fired through the window, keeping the men pinned as Eliza slipped out the back. Samuel clutched tight against her chest. Caleb roared orders, fury breaking through his control. "Go after them." Footsteps crunched through snow, moving fast. Jonah didn't think. He moved. He burst out the side door and circled wide, using the storm as cover. He tackled one of the men from behind, driving him into the snow, knocking the gun free. A single, brutal blow ended the fight. The second man turned just as Jonah raised the rifle. "Don't," the man begged. Jonah hesitated only a fraction. Then he fired. Silence followed, broken only by the wind. Caleb stood alone now, backing toward his horse, eyes wild. "This isn't over," he snarled. Jonah advanced, rifle steady. "It is for you." Caleb mounted and fled into the storm, fear finally outrunning pride. Jonah stood shaking, the adrenaline fading, the cost settling in. He turned toward the trees, toward the trail Eliza had taken, and prayed he hadn't sent her into something worse. Eliza ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled. Samuel's small body heavy in her arms despite the terror giving her strength. The world had narrowed to white and shadow, to the rhythm of her breath and the pounding of her heart. "Hold on," she whispered to her son. "Just a little longer." Samuel stirred weakly, his face pale against her shoulder. "Mama, cold." "I know, sweetheart. I know." She shifted him higher, tucking his face beneath her chin, shielding him from the wind with her own body. The back trail Jonah had described was barely visible now, half buried beneath drifting snow. Trees loomed like dark sentinels, their branches groaning under the weight of winter. Every step felt like a gamble. Slip, fall, don't fall. A shout echoed faintly behind her. Eliza froze. For one terrible moment, she thought she'd imagined it. Then came the crunch of boots, distant but real. Someone was following. She forced herself forward, pain screaming in her calves, fear clawing at her spine. The creek bend appeared ahead, a dark line cutting through the white. She slipped down the bank, nearly losing her footing, and pressed herself into the trees beyond. She waited, breath held. A shape moved through the snow. Then another, not Jonah. Two men. They moved cautiously, guns drawn, scanning the woods. "Eliza," one called. "It doesn't have to be like this." She pressed Samuel closer, his small body shuddering with cold. The men split up, one moving toward the creek, the other angling left. Trapped, Eliza's fingers brushed a revolver in her pocket. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Aim steady. Decide before you pull the trigger." Her hands shook. Then another sound cut through the storm. A rifle shot. One of the men dropped a cry, disappearing into the snow. The second spun, firing wildly into the trees. Jonah emerged from the white like something born of it, his face grim, rifle steady despite the wind. He fired once more. Silence returned, thick and heavy. Eliza sank to her knees, sobbing silently, Samuel's weak arms clinging to her neck. Jonah reached some seconds later, breath ragged, snow clinging to his coat. "You're hurt?" he asked urgently. She shook her head. "No, just cold." He knelt beside them, pulling his coat open and wrapping around Samuel, then around Eliza both. His hands were firm, certain, grounding. "We can't go back," she said, panic rising. "The cabin—" "I know." Jonah looked toward the dark trees. "It's gone, or it will be." Her chest tightened. "Then what do we do?" Jonah exhaled slowly. "There's an old line shack near the ridge. barely standing, but it'll block the wind. We wait there until morning." Eliza nodded, trusting him without question now. They moved together through the storm, Jonah breaking trail. Eliza clinging to Samuel and to the sound of Jonah's voice when the wind grew too loud. By the time they reached the shack, her legs nearly gave out. Jonah kicked the door in, ushered them inside, and set to work immediately. Firewood, flint, motion without hesitation. The flames caught slowly, grudgingly, but when they did, warmth bloomed like a miracle. Eliza sat against the wall, Samuel cradled in her lap, tears streaming down her face as the fear finally released its grip. "I thought I was going to lose him," she whispered. Jonah crouched beside them. "You didn't." She looked at him then, really looked, snow-streaked, bloodied knuckles, exhaustion carved into his face, and resolve beneath it all. "You didn't have to come after us," she said. Jonah met her gaze. "I said I wouldn't leave you unprotected." Silence settled, broken only by the crackle of fire. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the small shack, something steadier had taken hold. Trust forged in fear, and a bond neither of them could undo now. And somewhere in the distance, a man who believed he owned what he could break was learning that some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Dawn came quietly, as if the world itself was afraid to disturb what had survived the night. The storm had spent its fury, leaving behind a landscape scrubbed clean and shining. Snow lay unbroken across the ridge, softening the sharp edges of rock and tree. Smoke curled thinly from the lined shack's crooked chimney, a fragile sign of life against the vast white. Jonah Mercer woke first. His body ached in places he hadn't known could ache, but the fire still held, and that mattered. He shifted carefully and looked toward the corner where Eliza sat, Samuel bundled in his coat, both of them asleep at last. The boy's breathing was steady now, slow and deep, the kind that meant warmth had finally reached his bones. Jonah let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He stepped outside, boots crunching softly in the snow, and scanned the land. No tracks, no riders, no movement but a lone hawk circling high above, riding the cold air like it owned the sky. It felt like a sign. When he returned inside, Eliza was awake, watching him with tired eyes that still held something fierce. "He's better," she said quietly. Jonah nodded. "He's strong." She hesitated, then spoke the question she'd been carrying. "Is it over?" Jonah considered the truth. "Caleb won't be coming back. Not after last night. Men like him rely on fear. Once it fails, they disappear." Eliza closed her eyes, relief washing over her in a shuddering wave. She pressed her forehead to Samuel's hair and whispered something Jonah didn't hear. Maybe a prayer, maybe a promise. They left the shack as the sun climbed higher, moving slowly, carefully. By the time the cabin came into view, smoke no longer rose from the chimney. The walls were blackened, the roof sagging in places where fire had taken hold. Eliza stopped short, grief flashing across her face. "You're home." Jonah looked at the ruin, then at her and the child standing beside him, alive. "It did its job," he said simply. "Kept us safe when it mattered." They stood there a long moment, letting go of what had been lost. Then Jonah gestured toward the barn. "There's another way forward." The barn still stood, weathered but solid. Jonah cleared space, patched a corner against the wind, and built a fire that burned true. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. It was enough. Days passed, then weeks. Samuel grew stronger, his laughter returning like sunlight after a long winter. Eliza worked beside Jonah, mending, cooking, learning the rhythms of the land. They spoke often, honestly, about fear, about loss, about the strange way survival braided people together. One evening, as the sky blushed pink with sunset, Eliza broke the quiet. "I beg for one night in your barn," she said softly. "I never imagined." Jonah met her eyes. "Neither did I." She swallowed. "You gave us your bed, your safety, your life as it was." Jonah looked out across the land. Some things are worth changing everything for. Samuel ran toward them then, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. "Mama, Jonah, look what I found." He held up a smooth stone shaped like a heart, proud as if he discovered treasure. Eliza laughed, the sound free and unburdened. Jonah felt something settle into place inside his chest, something he thought was gone forever. Later that night, as the fire crackled low and Samuel slept curled between blankets, Eliza spoke again. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," she said, "but for the first time, I'm not afraid of it." Jonah nodded. That's how new beginnings work. They don't promise ease, just possibility. She reached for his hand, tentative but certain. He didn't pull away. Outside, the stars burned clear and steady, the same stars that had watched a desperate woman beg for shelter and a lonely man choose kindness over fear. The land hadn't changed, but the lives within it had. And in the quiet that followed the storm, something rare took root. Not just safety, not just survival, but hope. Because sometimes all it takes to change everything is one knock in the dark, and one person brave enough to open the door.